When my son told me, "Mama, please don't embarrass me when you meet Clara's parents," something in my heart cracked. Quiet, but deep. Like a teacup sliding from the counter. You can almost catch it, but you don't. You just watch it fall. He said it with a smile, the kind of smile people use to soften cruelty. Just don't mention the diner, okay? Or the farm. They're very particular. Such a small word to carry so much distance. I looked at my boy, my Michael, and all I could see was the little boy who once brought me dandelions in a jelly jar. The boy who cried when I burned my hand on the stove, who said, "Mama, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house so you never have to work again." And here he was, asking me to hide what I'd worked so hard for. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands. Hands that had washed his clothes, packed his lunches, clapped for him at every graduation. I thought, how did these same hands become an embarrassment to him? The first time I met Clara, she was radiant, all gloss and glow, her perfume sweet and her smile rehearsed. She kissed my cheek like she didn't want her lips to touch my skin. "Oh, Mrs. Hill," she said brightly, "Michael told me so much about you. You're so humble." That word, humble, landed sharp. It always does when it comes from the lips of someone who's never gone without. Her parents came soon after. Her father's handshake was limp, like he feared calluses were contagious. Her mother's smile was polite but cold. Her eyes scanning me head to toe, like I was a thrift store find she might regret buying. We sat down for dinner at a table big enough to feed a whole neighborhood. Silver so shiny I could see my tired face in it. They talked about stocks, properties, summer homes. I sipped my water and listened, quietly, as if I were invisible. And perhaps, in their eyes, I was. At one point Clara's mother leaned closer. "So, Mrs. Hill," she asked, tilting her head, "you still work at that little diner?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Been there 22 years. She smiled, that tight kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "That's impressive. Such dedication." Her husband chuckled. "Not many people stay in one place that long anymore. I suppose some folks find comfort in the familiar." Michael laughed, softly, nervously. "Mama's old-fashioned," he said. "She likes things simple." I looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment, I didn't recognize my own son. His shoulders stiffened. His voice borrowed a tone that didn't belong to him. I realized he wasn't just sitting at that table. He was auditioning for it. And right then, I made a decision. If they wanted a poor, simple woman, I'd give them one. I'd let them think I didn't understand their words, their money, their little looks. Because sometimes, being underestimated is the sharpest tool you can carry. When dessert came, lemon tart so delicate it barely had the courage to exist. Clara's father raised his glass and said, "To new beginnings." To family. Everyone clinked their crystal glasses. I lifted mine, too. Water in a wineglass, pretending to belong. I saw how Clara's mother's gaze lingered on my plain dress, how her daughter subtly rolled her eyes when I mispronounced soufflé. And my son, my sweet boy, he saw it too. But he said nothing. That silence cut deeper than any insult could have. After dinner, Clara's father offered to show Michael his study. The men left, and I sat there with Clara and her mother. Her mother folded her napkin slowly. "You must be very proud," she said. I smiled. "Yes, I am. He's my heart." She nodded. "Of course. And I'm sure you'll understand if we want the best for him." That was her way of saying we think he deserves better than where he came from. I just nodded again, and let them believe I didn't hear what they really meant. Some truths don't need to be fought with words. They reveal themselves with time. That night, when I got home, I didn't cry. I brewed myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the old photograph on the wall. Michael in his graduation gown, his arm around me, both of us beaming like the world was ours. I whispered to that picture, "When did I stop being enough for you, baby?" The house was silent. Only the refrigerator hummed, faithful and steady, just like me. And for the first time, I realized something. All those years I spent working overtime, skipping meals so Michael could eat better, walking home in the rain so he could have bus fare. I thought I was building him a future, but maybe I had built him a distance. Still, I knew I wasn't done being his mother. And mothers, real mothers, don't chase approval. We stand still and let truth circle back home. So I decided to play my part. If they thought I was naive, let them. If they saw me as poor, simple, beneath them, that was fine. Because people like that never suspect the quiet ones are paying attention. And I was paying attention. To every tone, every sideways glance, every word that dripped sugar but tasted of iron. I had no plan yet. Just a feeling. A stillness inside me that whispered, wait. Because life has a way of turning tables without asking permission. And I could feel, deep down, that their turn was coming. When I think about where this story truly began, it wasn't at that fancy dinner table, or even at Michael's wedding. It began much earlier, in a small house with peeling paint, a squeaky screen door, and the smell of frying onions drifting through the air. That's where my life started, and where I raised my boy. I was 19 when I had Michael. Back then, I thought love could carry a family even when money couldn't. His father, Daniel, was tall, charming, and restless. A dreamer with empty pockets and quick promises. He used to say, "My one day will have a real house, with a porch swing, a dog, and a yard big enough for Michael to play in." I believed him, because that's what love makes you do. It makes you believe even the foolish parts. But life has its own plans. When Michael turned 6, I came home from the diner one evening, still wearing my apron, smelling like coffee and grease. And I found Daniel's wedding ring sitting on the counter beside a folded note. The note said only 8 words, "I can't live this small, don't hate me." That was the night the house got quiet. No shouting. No goodbye, just silence, thick and permanent. Michael came out of his room holding his toy car, his big brown eyes looking up at me. "Where's Daddy?" he asked. I swallowed hard. He had to go somewhere, baby. He nodded once. Like he understood something no child should have to. That night, after I tucked him in, I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the fridge and cried until morning. And when the sun came up, I made him breakfast, packed his lunch, and went to work. Because when you're a mother, you don't always get the luxury of falling apart. The Sunnyside Diner became my second home. It smelled like burnt toast, strong coffee, and tired people trying to get through another day. The counter stools wobbled, the jukebox skipped every third song, and the owner, old Mr. Jenkins, smoked more than he smiled. But it was honest work. I poured coffee for truck drivers, listened to their stories, and smiled through sore feet and double shifts. Tips weren't much, quarters. Sometimes a crumpled dollar. But I saved every penny. I kept them in a chipped Folgers can under the sink labeled, "For Michael's future." Every night, after Michael went to bed, I'd sit by that can, shake it a little, and whisper, "One day, baby, one day." Michael grew up with laughter in his bones despite the emptiness around us. He was always curious. Building little machines out of spare parts, fixing the old radio, asking me why stars don't fall down. I didn't know the answers, but I told him, because they know their place, sweetheart. Even stars need to stay put sometimes. When he turned 12, he got his first computer from a yard sale. Missing keys, cracked screen. Didn't even turn on. He took it apart, cleaned it, and made it work again. That was the first time I realized my boy had a mind built for more than small-town dreams. Life was never easy, but it was ours. We didn't have fancy vacations or expensive gifts, but we had laughter. Real, loud belly, deep laughter that filled the cracks of that old house. Some nights, when I'd come home late from the diner, I'd find Michael asleep at the kitchen table, school books open, a sandwich half eaten beside him. I'd brush his hair back, kiss his forehead, and whisper, "You're gonna go far, baby. Farther than I ever did." And he'd mumble, half asleep, "Don't worry, mama. When I'm rich, I'll take care of you." Those were the kind of promises that kept me going through winters with broken heaters and summers with no air conditioning. The day the scholarship letter came, I was on my break, wiping down a table when my phone rang. "Mama," he said, his voice shaking, "I got it. Full ride. University of St. Albans." I sat right down on that diner stool and cried. In front of customers, in front of the boss, in front of everybody. When I got home that night, I cooked a full meal. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and his favorite pecan pie. We sat at the table, just the two of us, and I told him, "This is the start of your big life, Michael. But remember, no matter how far you go, never forget who you are." He nodded. "I won't, Mama. I promise." He meant it then, I know he did. The first semester he called every week. He'd tell me about his classes, his professors, the big city lights. But slowly, the calls became shorter, then fewer. When he came home that Christmas, he wore new clothes, used big words, and carried himself differently. He hugged me, but it felt like a habit, not a need. He told me about the people he'd met. Kids whose parents owned companies, drove expensive cars, and spent summers in Europe. "They're not like people back home, Mama," he said one night. "They think big." I smiled. "Ain't nothing wrong with thinking big, baby. Just don't start thinking better." He laughed, kissed my cheek, and said, "You worry too much." But something in his eyes had already changed. When he met Clara, I heard about her before I saw her. "Clara's amazing, Mama. Smart, confident, driven. Her family's well established." That's the word he used. Established. Like they were a monument, and I was still scaffolding. The first time she came home, she looked like a magazine cover, perfect hair, pale dress, expensive perfume that smelled like flowers that had never seen real dirt. "Mrs. Hill," she said, shaking my hand. "I've heard so much about you." I smiled. "And I've heard plenty about you too, dear." She looked around my house, her eyes landing on the crocheted tablecloth, the faded couch, the pictures on the wall. "This place is so cozy," she said. But the way she said cozy felt like a ribbon tied around an insult. That night I made fried chicken and collard greens. Michael used to beg for it as a boy. Clara took one bite, smiled politely, and said, "Oh, this is very southern." Michael chuckled. Mama's cooking could feed an army. She never learned portion control. They both laughed. I smiled, but my hands trembled as I cleared the plates. It's funny how a single laugh can make years of sacrifice feel small. When they left, I stood at the doorway, waving until their car disappeared. Then I went inside, washed the dishes, and sat at the table in silence. I looked around my little kitchen. The old radio playing faintly, the Folgers can still under the sink, and I realized everything I'd built was suddenly not enough. But I told myself, he's just trying to fit in. I didn't know then that fitting in sometimes means cutting someone out. 2 years later he called. "Mama, I have news," he said. "Clara and I are getting married." I gasped. "Oh, baby. Congratulations! When's the wedding?" He hesitated. "We're still planning. Clara's family wants something small. Just private." A few days later, I saw the announcement on Facebook. A picture of them holding hands, her diamond ring sparkling like a promise to the world. The caption read, "Forever starts now." No tag. No mention of me. That night, I sat with a cup of tea, staring at that photo, and told myself he was just busy. But the ache in my chest said otherwise. When I finally met Clara's parents, the Harringtons, everything clicked. They were polished people, the kind who used money as both shield and sword. Her father wore a suit that looked too expensive to breathe in, and her mother smiled the way people do when they've already decided they're better than you. Dinner with them was like sitting at an audition for worthiness. They talked about art galleries, investments, charity galas. Things I'd only ever seen on television. When her father asked where I worked, I said, "At the Sunnyside Diner." He blinked once, then said, "Oh, that's admirable. Admirable." Another word that meant small. Michael jumped in. "Mama's just being humble. She's thinking about retiring soon." I nodded, though I hadn't said that. Because sometimes, silence is kinder than truth. After that dinner, the distance between us grew wider. Phone calls became formal. Visits stopped altogether. Sometimes I'd see pictures online. The two of them at charity events, brunches, vacations. And I'd think, he looks happy. But then I'd look closer and wonder, happy or just comfortable? When the wedding invitation finally came, it was elegant and cold. White envelope. Gold lettering, no handwritten note. I ironed my thrifted navy dress, polished my shoes, and took the bus to the Harrington estate. The place was like something out of a dream. Or maybe a nightmare if you don't belong. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, people who smelled like money and distance. When Michael saw me, he smiled politely. "Mama, you made it." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, and I meant it. But I could see it. That tiny flicker of discomfort in his eyes, as if my presence was a reminder of something he'd outgrown. At the reception, no one really spoke to me. I sat near the back, watching him dance with Clara under the soft lights, her dress shimmering like something untouchable. And even though my heart ached, I smiled. Because a mother's love doesn't vanish, even when it's misplaced. When the night ended, I slipped outside. The air was cool, the sky full of stars. I looked up and whispered, "I hope she loves you right, baby." The stars didn't answer, but I felt something settle in me. A quiet strength. The kind that comes from surviving long enough to know the difference between hurt and heartbreak. A month later, when Clara's parents invited me to dinner to discuss family matters, I went, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see who I was truly dealing with. The house was spotless, cold, and silent. Clara greeted me in a silk dress, her smile warm but rehearsed. Her father cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hill, we appreciate you coming. We'd like to help you transition into retirement." I blinked. "Excuse me." He slid an envelope across the table. "Michael mentioned you're still working. It's not ideal, given his position. We think it would be best if you stopped. This is a small gesture of support." Inside the envelope was a check, more money than I'd ever seen at once. I looked up, my voice calm. "You're paying me to disappear." Your Clara's mother smiled faintly. "Of course not. We just want to help you live comfortably. It's for your own good." I pushed the envelope back. "My good doesn't come with strings." Her smile froze. "You'd refuse help." "I'm not refusing help," I said softly. "I'm refusing ownership." Then I stood, smoothed my dress, and said, "Tell Michael I love him. He'll understand someday." And I walked out of that house with my head high, poorer in money, maybe, but richer in truth. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table again. The same table where I'd fed my boy, paid my bills, and dreamed our dreams. And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because pain sometimes comes out that way. I thought, these people don't know me. They think I'm small, but they've never seen how deep small roots can go. Let them think I'm naive. Let them think I don't understand their world. Because what I understand is this. People who build their worth on money will crumble when it's gone. And people like me, we've been through worse and still found ways to stand. The first time I truly felt the distance between Michael and me, it wasn't a harsh word or a shouted argument. It was in the quiet, measured way he looked at me one evening as I tried to help him and Clara move some boxes into the living room. The house was huge, bigger than any place I had ever imagined stepping into. The hardwood floors gleamed like ice. There were art pieces I didn't understand and sculptures that looked too fragile to touch. "Careful with that," Michael said, as if I were holding a porcelain teacup instead of a cardboard box. "I'm careful, baby," I said softly. Clara smiled, a little too sweetly. "We wouldn't want anything broken, would we?" I forced a smile, setting the box down gently, but I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I realized then that I wasn't just being watched. I was being judged. And judged I was. At first, the moments were small. Michael's jokes no longer reached my ears as laughter, but as polite noises to fill a silence I no longer understood. Dinner conversations were clipped, deliberate. Clara would tell me about her plans, the galas, the business events, all with the soft implication that I belonged in a different world entirely. A world of diners, thrift stores, and small-town afternoons. "Do you still cook like this?" she asked one evening, nodding toward the modest roast I had prepared for Michael. "Yes, dear," I said. "This is what he likes." Michael didn't look up. He had taken to murmuring something about presentation and refined tastes, leaving me feeling invisible. It was subtle. A look here, A soft chuckle there, but it was everywhere. Over time, the invitations to their home became exercises in endurance. Every visit required me to navigate a maze of unspoken rules and hidden critiques. Clara had a way of complimenting me that sounded more like a verdict than praise. "Oh, Mrs. Hill, you did such a quaint job with the table setting." Quaint. As if simple could ever replace elegance, as if warmth could ever measure against wealth. Michael didn't correct her. He just nodded, a soft smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. And every time he failed to stand up for me, my heart sank a little deeper. One Sunday afternoon, they invited me for lunch. The table was long, filled with people I didn't know. Friends of Clara's, colleagues of Michael's. All dressed perfectly, speaking in tones that I had to strain to follow. Clara leaned over and whispered, "Try not to say anything too simple." I forced a smile, nodding, pretending I didn't feel the sting. Michael's motherly instincts told me to retreat, to shrink, to protect myself from what was coming. But I sat, silently, sipping tea and listening. And that's when it happened. The first real crack. Clara's friend mentioned a charity gala they had attended. "Oh, it was marvelous," she said. "So many people doing so much good." I asked politely, "What kind of charity?" Clara leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp. "It's a fundraiser for the arts, Mama. Not exactly the kind of thing you're used to." I felt my cheeks burn. Michael didn't look at me. He was laughing politely at a joke I couldn't understand. I realized then that I wasn't just out of place. I was a spectacle. A part of me wanted to speak up, to say, "I've fed this boy, washed his clothes, held him through fevers and heartbreaks. Do you think I don't understand the world?" But I stayed silent. I swallowed the words, held my breath, and nodded. Because mothers learn early that sometimes survival is quieter than justice. The weeks that followed were harder. I began to notice small digs, the way Clara would comment on my clothes, the subtle glances when I fumbled the silverware, the gentle sighs when I mispronounced some fancy wine. Michael no longer defended me. Sometimes, he even repeated their phrasing, as if he had absorbed their lessons of shame. One evening, I baked a pie for them, the kind Michael loved since he was little. I placed it carefully on the table, the crust golden, the smell warm and comforting. Clara looked at it, tilted her head, and said, "It's charming. So rustic." Michael said nothing. I felt the room shrink, my pride crumble. I wanted to disappear. Soon, they started involving me in their social events. But only as a tool. I was asked to attend brunches or help with the smaller tasks, but every invitation carried the underlying expectation that I would humbly acknowledge my place. At one garden party, Clara asked me to serve drinks to her friends. "Be careful with the champagne," she said, smiling. "It's vintage, very expensive." I smiled, nodding. But inside, a quiet fury began to grow. I realized that my presence wasn't welcomed for who I was. It was tolerated for the way it made Michael look. As if he were charitable, kind, patient. And when he didn't stop it, didn't even notice, I began to feel invisible. Michael began to withdraw further. He spent less time talking with me, less time laughing at the old jokes we once shared. The boy I knew, the one who promised he'd take care of me, seemed to be fading into someone else. One evening, I asked gently, "Michael, do you still want me here?" He looked at me, startled, and said, "Of course, Mama." "Don't say that." But the warmth in his eyes wasn't there. And that was worse than any outright rejection. Because love, unspoken, can die quietly. The breaking point came at a small dinner at their home, a week before Michael's birthday. Clara had invited some of her family and friends, all polished and perfect, and I was to be the honored guest. The mother-in-law who had been allowed into this world. I wore my navy dress, polished shoes, and pearl earrings, my attempt to blend in. The house smelled of roasted meat and expensive candles. The silverware gleamed, the tablecloth was pristine, and I felt, from the first step, like I was stepping onto a stage I had never auditioned for. Dinner began politely, small talk, laughter, all carefully curated. Clara leaned over at one point, whispering, "Try not to embarrass Michael. He's worked hard to get where he is." I smiled politely, and sat down. But the whisper burned. Because here was the truth, I hadn't embarrassed him. I had only existed. As the main course arrived, Clara's sister asked about my work at the diner. "Oh, I used to work at a diner," I said quietly. Clara corrected me gently. "She still works at the diner, dear. But it's modest. Modest." Another word to shrink me, to make me small in a room where everyone measured worth in dollars and connections. Michael said nothing. I felt the ache in my chest, the quiet collapse of pride that no one noticed but me. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Clara's friends commented on my quaint upbringing and simple manners. I laughed quietly, letting them speak, letting the words fall over me like raindrops on old skin. But inside, my heart tightened. I realized that Michael's silence was worse than their words. He could have stopped it. He could have stood for me. Instead, he laughed along, polite and distant, as if we were strangers. That night, I sat alone in the guest room, pretending to rest. But I couldn't sleep. I thought of the little boy who had hugged me after every scraped knee, every nightmare, every cold winter morning. I thought of the boy who promised he'd take care of me. And I realized that promise had been buried under wealth, sophistication, and feener. For weeks after that dinner, I felt like a ghost in their home. Michael and Clara invited me for events, but each invitation felt like a test. If I smiled, I was too simple. If I stayed quiet, I was aloof. If I offered advice, I was interfering. I began to doubt myself. Was I too old-fashioned? Too loud? Too ordinary? I walked through the city streets at night, smelling bread from bakeries, hearing laughter from families, and I felt the weight of being invisible. It was a new kind of pain. Not the pain of loss or poverty, but of being unwanted in your child's life. The final straw came during Michael's birthday celebration at their home. Clara had organized everything: the perfect cake, the perfect guests, the perfect house. I arrived with a simple gift, a photograph of Michael when he was a boy, framed carefully. When I gave it to him, he looked at it, smiled politely, and said, "Thanks, Mama." "That's nice." The words were not cruel, but the tone was cold. It was the tone of a stranger thanking another stranger. Clara smiled at me warmly, but her eyes were sharp. "Isn't it adorable how sentimental she is?" she whispered to a guest. And Michael didn't stop her. That night I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and cried. I cried for the boy I had raised. I cried for the mother I had been, the love I had poured into a life that had begun to forget me. I cried for the empty spaces in my heart that no wealth or politeness could fill. And yet, through the tears, a small, fierce voice whispered inside me, "This isn't the end." Not yet. Because even in despair, I could feel the stirrings of something else. Something quiet, slow, and unyielding. The knowledge that someday, the truth would come. After months of subtle humiliation, polite distance, and constant judgment, I began to feel like a shadow in my own son's life. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow erosion, a quiet wearing away of everything I had believed in. Every smile I gave, every kind word I whispered, seemed absorbed by a house that didn't belong to me, by people who tolerated me only as a backdrop, and by a son who had learned to look the other way. I still remember that evening with crystal clarity. It was Michael and Clara's first wedding anniversary. They had invited me, insisting it would be a small family gathering, a quiet celebration. I pictured something intimate, perhaps a simple dinner, a chance to see my boy laugh without pretension. Instead, I walked into a house that felt like a museum curated for perfection. The hardwood floors gleamed under chandeliers that seemed to hang from the heavens. The walls were lined with art I couldn't name, sculptures placed with deliberate care, and candles glimmering in holders of fragile crystal. Everything smelled faintly of roses and vanilla, a scent designed to impress, to remind me I did not belong. Clara greeted me at the door with a smile wide enough to charm a room, but soft at the edges, like silk hiding a blade. "Mama, so glad you're here," she said, her tone even and measured. I returned the smile, my voice steady, "Thank you, dear. It means a lot to be included." She tilted her head slightly, eyes glinting in the candlelight. "Of course. We wouldn't want anyone feeling out of place." Her words should have been kind. Instead, they landed like stones in my chest. I already felt out of place. Now, she was telling me it was my fault. The evening began politely. Soft music filled the rooms, clinking glasses, low laughter, conversations in tones I struggled to follow. I tried to engage, asking questions about their travels, their charity events, their work. Each answer I gave was met with polite nods, faint smiles, and occasional glances that made me shrink. Clara guided the conversation away from me, steering Michael toward topics that were foreign to me. She laughed lightly when he explained things I didn't understand, and I smiled along, holding back the sting that crept into my chest. The first sharp sting came over dessert. I had baked a small apple pie, his favorite, the one I always made when he was a boy. I carried it carefully to the table, placing it in front of him. "I thought you might enjoy a taste of home," I said softly, forcing warmth into my words. Clara's head tilted, and she examined it with mild amusement. "It's quaint," she said, "quaint." Michael did not speak. He poked at the crust, avoiding my gaze. Then one of her friends leaned close, voice dripping with fox curiosity. "She's so sentimental, isn't she? A real throwback." Every ounce of warmth drained from my body. My hands shook, but I forced a smile and a nod. I stayed silent, swallowing back a flurry of words I wanted to shout. "I raised this boy! I held him through every cold night, every scraped knee." The night dragged on, each passing hour heavier than the last. Conversations were full of veiled critiques. I could feel them in every laugh, every glance. Michael spoke less and less, polite gestures replacing the genuine laughter we had once shared. I realized, in the quiet spaces between words, that I had become invisible. Not absent, not forgotten entirely, invisible. Present, but disregarded. And the person who should have defended me, who should have held my hand, was silent. Clara seemed to delight in guiding these moments, each small humiliation carefully disguised. One story I told from Michael's childhood, the time he built a treehouse with scraps from the yard, was met with laughter, polite but hollow. "Oh, that's adorable, Mama. But remember, we prefer stories that show sophistication," Clara whispered. Sophistication. Every syllable was a reminder that my life, my love, my effort, my sacrifices, were all invisible here. Michael did not intervene. He looked at me politely, eyes downcast, as if saying, "Not now, Mama." The final blow that night came from Clara's cousin, a young man clearly coached to belittle gently. He leaned close, smirk playing at his lips. "You know, it's amazing how Michael turned out so well, considering everything." Everything. The word hung in the air like smoke curling around my chest, suffocating and sharp. I felt my heart shatter quietly, each fragment piercing deeper than the last. And Michael allowed it. My boy, my child, my own son allowed it. I excused myself and went to the guest room, hands trembling, chest heavy, tears threatening to spill. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at walls, at the soft glow of the candles filtering in from the living room, at the shadows that seemed to crowd the corners of the room. I could hear their laughter, polite and rehearsed, and I felt the weight of being invisible pressing down on me. Not absent, not ignored entirely, but reduced. Reduced to a relic, a backdrop, a shadow of the woman who had raised Michael, who had loved him fiercely, who had sacrificed everything so he could be safe, happy and loved. I cried for hours that night quietly, allowing the tears to fall freely. I cried not just for myself, but for the mother I had been, for the boy I had raised, for the life that had slipped from my grasp without me noticing. Sleep never came that night. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every glance, every veiled comment, every subtle smirk. I thought about all the sacrifices, the cold mornings at the diner, the hours spent working while my heart ached for him, the nights I stayed awake worrying about his future. I asked myself, was it enough? Did I fail him? Have I failed him so completely that he now allows this cruelty? The questions circled endlessly, relentless, like a storm that refused to break. Days turned into weeks. Each visit to Michael and Clara's home became an endurance test. I was invited, yes, but the invitations carried an unspoken expectation to be grateful, silent, and small. My opinions, my humor, my warmth were dismissed as quaint or sentimental. I felt like a visitor in my own son's life, tolerated but not cherished. Michael's presence was polite but distant. The warmth in his eyes had faded. When he hugged me, kissed my cheek, or smiled, it was out of obligation. Gestures emptied of love and replaced with duty. And Clara's presence was always near, a constant reminder that I did not belong. Every compliment carried an edge. Every smile was measured. I felt my own sense of self eroding with each passing day. I remember one evening, visiting them unannounced, hoping for a private moment with Michael. I found him in the living room, surrounded by Clara and her friends, laughing politely at a story I didn't understand. When he saw me, his smile flickered, a small, hesitant shadow of recognition. "Hey, Mama," he said softly. "Michael," I whispered. "I just wanted to see you." Clara interrupted, smooth and soft. "We're in the middle of a story, darling. Maybe later?" "Later." The word rang in my ears like a bell tolling over something already lost. Michael said nothing. He simply nodded, averting his gaze. I left quietly, the achy in my chest threatening to swallow me whole. Weeks passed in a blur of polite invitations, thinly veiled criticism, and quiet evenings at home where I questioned everything. My worth, my place, my love. I doubted myself in ways I had never doubted anything before. Was I too simple? Too ordinary? Too old-fashioned? Each whispered critique, every polite dismissal, every glance that suggested I did not belong became a slow erosion of my confidence, my self-worth. One night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the dim lamplight, crumbs from my tea, and the quiet walls that had held my life for decades. I thought about the little boy I had hugged through scraped knees, sleepless nights, and cold mornings. I thought about the boy who had promised, "Mama, I'll take care of you." And I realized that promise had been buried beneath wealth, sophistication, and fear. I cried for hours that night. Not just for myself, but for the mother I had been, the boy I had raised, the life that had slowly slipped from my grasp. And yet, in the darkness, a quiet voice whispered inside me, "This is not the end." Not yet. Even in despair, I felt the stirrings of something else. A stubborn ember of strength, of love, of dignity. The pain was unbearable, yes, but it had not defeated me. And in that quiet, shrouded room, I began to feel it. The first inklings of awakening, the knowledge that someday, the truth would emerge. Even when love is tested, even when it seems invisible, it remains. And from that quiet place, the seeds of resilience begin to grow. The days after Michael's anniversary party were the darkest I had known in years. I drifted through my home like a ghost, moving from room to room, touching the furniture as if it could anchor me, as if it could remind me that I still had a place in the world. But the emptiness lingered. Even the familiar smells of my small kitchen, the soft creak of the old floorboards, the sunlight spilling through the curtains, all felt hollow. I began to question everything. Not just my role in Michael's life, but my worth, my value, my very being. Was I too simple, too ordinary, too flawed? I replayed every interaction, every glance, every veiled remark, searching for answers, blaming myself for the way my son had become distant, for the way Clara's family had belittled me. And yet, in the midst of this despair, a small whisper began to stir, quiet, almost imperceptible, but persistent. "You are still here. You are still you. And that matters." It started with small things. I began noticing details in my life I had overlooked in my grief. The sound of the wind in the trees outside my window, the way sunlight struck the kitchen counter, the warmth of my own hands holding a cup of tea. These small comforts reminded me that life still had textures and colors beyond the world of Clara and her polished, judgmental family. One evening, while cleaning the living room, I picked up an old photo of Michael as a boy, holding his first baseball glove, a toothless grin on his face. I smiled through tears, remembering the way he had trusted me, confided in me, relied on me without reservation. And it struck me, I hadn't changed. He had grown, yes, and the world around him had shifted, but my love, my care, my devotion remained. That was still mine. A turning point came unexpectedly. I met Ruth, a woman I had known casually through the diner. Ruth was sharp, confident, and kind in a way that demanded attention. She had heard some of my troubles, sensed my pain through quiet conversation. One afternoon, she said something that changed everything. "You know, Sometimes we let people diminish us because we don't realize our own strength," she said, stirring her tea with deliberate care. "But the truth is, your worth isn't measured by their approval. It's measured by the love you give, by the integrity you hold, by the courage to stand even when no one is watching." Her words settled into me like seeds in fertile soil. I realized, in that moment, that I had allowed the Harringtons' Clara, and even Michael's polite distance, to define my value. I had given them power over my heart, my identity, my dignity, and I could take that power back. I began to pay attention to the ways I had silenced myself. How I had smoothed over criticism, swallowed embarrassment, and endured subtle humiliation because I wanted Michael's love, acceptance, and happiness. I realized that love that required my invisibility was not the love I had nurtured in him as a child. True love doesn't make you small. True love doesn't demand your surrender to shame. I began to reflect on my own life. All I had endured, all I had given. The long nights at the diner, the sacrifices for Michael's education, the warmth and care I poured into him. And for the first time in months, I felt pride. Pride in who I was, what I had done, and the integrity I still carried. Empowerment, I realized, began with awareness. The next step was clarity. I started keeping a journal, writing every interaction, every thought, every feeling. I wrote about Clara's veiled insults, Michael's polite silences, the dinners, the parties, the quiet comments that had chipped away at me. Writing made it real, concrete, undeniable. For the first time, I could see the pattern clearly. The manipulations, the subtle control, the humiliation. It was not in my imagination. I also began to reach out, quietly, to people who supported me. Ruth, my sister. A neighbor I had once confided in. Their perspectives helped me see that I had been unfair to myself, that the world had not always been cruel, that love and kindness still existed outside the Harrington household. I felt myself, worth begin to reassemble piece by piece. One morning, I woke with a resolve that startled me. I had been silent too long. I had endured too much. I realized I could no longer let my son and his wife dictate how I felt about myself. I was ready to act, not out of anger, but out of love for myself and for the truth. I began with small steps. I stopped bending over backward to accommodate Clara's whims. I allowed myself to decline certain invitations, recognizing that my presence should not come at the cost of my dignity. I began asserting my opinions in conversations, softly but firmly, refusing to accept subtle digs. Each time I spoke, I felt a weight lift. The awakening was not immediate, it came in moments. A quiet refusal here, a gentle assertion there. I began to notice Michael's reactions. He looked at me differently, cautiously at first, then with a hint of recognition, as if seeing his mother in full color for the first time in years. Clara noticed too. She tried, subtly, to redirect, to correct, to control. But I had changed. I no longer shrank. I no longer apologized for my existence. Her words bounced off, empty and powerless. For the first time, I realized that manipulation loses its strength when the heart it seeks to wound refuses to submit. I also sought guidance from a local counselor, someone Ruth recommended. Talking to her gave me tools to process my pain, to set boundaries, to assert myself without guilt. I learned the importance of self-compassion, the necessity of recognizing manipulation for what it was, and the power of reclaiming emotional sovereignty. Through these conversations, I began to plan. Not revenge. No, that was never my way. But action. I would protect myself. I would establish limits. I would not allow my presence to be a stage for humiliation. And I would hold my head high, regardless of Michael's hesitation or Clara's subtle cruelty. One afternoon, I visited Michael and Clara with a new perspective. I had rehearsed nothing. I simply entered their home with calm in my steps, warmth in my smile, and dignity in my posture. Clara greeted me with her usual polished smile, the slight edge of control in her tone. "Mama, you're here early," she said. "Yes," I replied softly. I wanted to see Michael and spend some time together. Her smile faltered slightly, a flash of annoyance in her eyes. But I ignored it. I focused on Michael. He looked up from his work, surprised, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw the boy I had raised, the one who still cared, deep down, beneath the layers of social polish. I realized that empowerment was not about confrontation, nor about proving others wrong. It was about claiming myself. My life, my worth, my love. It was about standing firm in the knowledge that I had given everything of myself, and that no subtle comment, no polite distance, could erase decades of devotion and sacrifice. Over time, I began to reconnect with Michael, not as a child clinging to his approval, but as an adult mother recognizing her son's flaws and his humanity. I spoke gently, honestly, and without shame. I no longer sought permission to exist in his world. I claimed my space, softly, steadily, without fear. I also began to rebuild my own life outside their home. I returned to old hobbies, reconnected with friends, and sought out small joys that reminded me who I was before all of this. A woman of love, strength, and resilience. I realized that life does not wait for anyone, and the moments I wasted shrinking for others could never be returned. The awakening, I realized, was not just about Michael or Clara. It was about me. About reclaiming the dignity that had been eroded, about recognizing my own worth, independent of anyone else's approval. And slowly, I began to feel peace. A cautious, fragile peace, but peace nonetheless. I was still hurt. I still felt the sting of exclusion and subtle humiliation. But I no longer allowed it to define me. I was not the same woman who had walked timidly into their home months ago. I was stronger, calmer, and infinitely more aware of my own power. I began to understand that empowerment is not sudden. It is incremental. It grows quietly, nurtured by self-respect, reflection, and the courage to stand even when no one applauds. By the time I sat alone one evening, reflecting on everything, I knew the Harringtons could never take my self-worth from me. Michael's distance, Clara's subtle cruelty, the social games, the whispered insults. None of it mattered if I refused to let it matter. I had survived every challenge life had thrown at me. Loss, hardship, loneliness, pain. This was merely another trial. And I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more grounded in my own heart. That evening, I looked out at the stars, letting their quiet light wash over me. I breathed in deeply, feeling the weight of the past months fall away. I was free, not in the sense of removing Michael or Clara from my life, but free in the sense of reclaiming myself. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Real, steady hope. The moment of confrontation didn't arrive with shouting, nor with dramatic gestures. No, it came quietly, deliberately, in a way that made it impossible to ignore. I had spent months rebuilding myself, reclaiming my dignity, and nurturing the quiet ember of strength that had survived years of hardship and humiliation. Now, that ember had grown into a flame. It began with an invitation, or perhaps a challenge. Clara had organized another gathering, claiming it was a casual dinner for friends and colleagues. But I knew her well enough to sense the underlying intent: control. Polished smiles, subtle tests, thinly veiled comments. I realized, in that moment, that the time had come to step fully into the woman I had become. I arrived at their home with careful calm. My hands were steady, my shoulders lifted, my heart aligned with the truth I had unearthed. Michael greeted me at the door, surprised to see the certainty in my posture. Clara's smile, perfect and measured, faltered for the first time as I entered. "Good evening," I said softly but firmly, looking at both of them. "I hope you don't mind if I speak openly tonight." Clara raised an eyebrow, a practiced expression of curiosity mixed with condescension. Michael's eyes flickered with hesitation. He had never seen me like this, poised, confident, unafraid. The evening began with polite chatter, but I refused to be a silent backdrop. I engaged in conversation, not to compete, not to dominate, but to speak my truth calmly and clearly. Clara made her first veiled comment, soft enough to seem innocuous. "Oh, Mama, I hope you didn't travel too far today." "I walked here on purpose," I said, steady, because I wanted to come with awareness, not fear. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's smile faltered. The guests looked at me, sensing the shift in the room. Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Mama?" he began, but I held up a hand. "No, Michael," I said gently. "Not yet. I need to finish what I must." I spoke slowly, deliberately. I told them about the months of subtle humiliation, the polite dismissals, the whispered comments that had chipped away at my heart. I described the dinners, the parties, the gatherings where I had been included only to serve as a stage for social performance, never for love or respect. I told them about the pain of seeing my own son allow this to happen. As I spoke, I could see the color drain from Clara's face. Her practiced calm began to crack. She opened her mouth to respond, but I did not pause. I spoke of Michael's childhood, of the sacrifices I had made to raise him, of the love I had poured into him, unwavering, unconditional, and true. I told them that love was not measured by wealth, status, or social polish, but by care, respect, and integrity. Clara tried to interject, voice smooth but tense. Of course, we respect your dedication, but... I raised a hand, steady. No, Clara. This isn't about respect or appearances, it's about truth. And the truth is, for too long I have been made to feel small in my own son's life. For too long, my presence has been tolerated rather than cherished. Her eyes narrowed, and I saw a flicker of anger, but also of uncertainty. For the first time, her control over the room faltered. Michael looked at me, his face a mixture of shock, guilt, and realization. I could see the boy I had raised behind the mask he had learned to wear. The boy who had once promised to always protect me. I have spent years loving this boy, raising him, nurturing him. I continued, voice steady but firm. And I will not allow anyone, no one, to diminish that love, to dismiss it, or to make me doubt my worth. Not tonight, not ever again. The room was still. Even the faint hum of background music seemed to fade. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Clara's friends looked at each other, sensing the shift in power. Michael finally spoke, voice low, vulnerable. Mama, I didn't realize. Yes, Michael, I said softly. You didn't realize. But now you do. And I hope you understand that love cannot coexist with silence in the face of disrespect. Respect is not given, it is lived. And I have lived it. I deserve it in return. Clara's composure cracked further. She attempted a dismissive laugh, thin and forced, but I continued, unwavering. This is not about anger or revenge, I said. This is about reclaiming what is mine: dignity, respect, and the right to exist fully in my son's life without fear, without shame, without manipulation. The power in the room had shifted. Clara's subtle dominance had collapsed under the weight of truth. Michael's eyes were wide, guilt and recognition mingling. Guests no longer hid their discomfort. The social dance of politeness had ended. I spoke then about boundaries. About how I would no longer accept subtle humiliation, whispered comments, or the diminishment of my love and devotion. I told Michael that his choices, his marriage, his life were his, but my presence in them would be defined by mutual respect and honesty, not control or social expectation. Clara's lips pressed together. She said nothing. I could feel her plotting, calculating, but for the first time, I was immune to her subtle manipulations. The flame inside me, once a flicker, was now steady and unassailable. Michael finally reached for my hand, voice trembling. Mama, I see now. I didn't understand how much I hurt you. I squeezed his hand gently. Michael, understanding is the first step. Change is next. But you must also accept that I am not invisible, and I am not small. My love for you has always been vast, but it cannot coexist with denial of my worth. The confrontation lasted for hours, though it felt like minutes. I spoke calmly, without accusation, without anger. I told them the truth about the years of emotional manipulation, about the subtle cruelty disguised as concern, and about the loneliness I had endured in my own son's home. By the end, Clara was silent. Michael looked pained, but attentive. Guests, initially uncomfortable, were quiet, witnessing a mother's quiet reclamation of her power and dignity. I realized something profound in that moment: confrontation does not require aggression. Truth spoken calmly and firmly is its own force. Lies, manipulations, and subtle cruelty collapse in the face of unwavering authenticity. After the confrontation, I left their home with a lightness I had not felt in months. I did not gloat, nor did I demand apologies. I simply walked away with the quiet knowledge that I had stood for myself, reclaimed my dignity, and asserted my worth. Michael called me the next day. His voice was soft, apologetic, and tentative. Mama, I'm sorry. I see it now. I should have protected you. I smiled gently, warmth returning. Thank you, Michael. Seeing is the first step. Protecting, understanding, and valuing what truly matters comes next. Clara, surprisingly, reached out with a strained but sincere attempt at acknowledgement. She could not undo the past, but she could see the power of truth, the force of a mother's unwavering love. In the weeks that followed, I continued to assert myself with quiet confidence. I attended gatherings on my terms, spoke freely, and allowed myself to feel respected and valued. Michael began to reconnect with me, not as a child seeking approval, but as a man recognizing the depth, dignity, and strength of the mother who had raised him. The Harringtons' subtle attempts at control faded. Their polished veneer could not withstand the truth I carried. Their whispers lost their sting. I had stepped fully into my own power, and nothing could remove it. I also realized that the confrontation had freed me from fear. Fear of judgment, fear of humiliation, fear of being small. I understood now that my value was intrinsic, not dependent on approval or recognition. That knowledge, once embraced, became the foundation for lasting peace. I began to reclaim not only my relationship with Michael, but also my life outside his home. I returned to hobbies I had abandoned, nurtured friendships long ignored, and allowed myself moments of joy and reflection. I understood that life is not merely endured, it is lived fully when we claim our own worth. The climax, I learned, was not in victory over others. It was in reclaiming oneself. The confrontation was not about defeating Clara or teaching Michael a lesson. It was about standing fully in truth, protecting my dignity, and demonstrating that love cannot coexist with manipulation or control. And in that quiet reclamation, I found freedom. I remember sitting in my garden that evening, the stars spilling like silver across the dark sky. The air was soft, scented with jasmine and earth. I breathed deeply, feeling the weight of months of pain lift from my shoulders. I had stood for myself, I had spoken truth. I had reclaimed my dignity, and I knew, no matter what came next, I was whole. The days after the confrontation passed with a quiet rhythm I had not felt in years. I woke each morning with a sense of calm that was foreign but deeply comforting. The ache in my chest, the weight of humiliation, the lingering sting of being overlooked, it had all begun to dissolve. I had faced the truth, spoken my heart, and reclaimed my dignity. And with that reclamation came freedom. I began to notice the small things again. The morning sun spilling through my window, the scent of fresh coffee brewing, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. These details, once taken for granted, became reminders that life is abundant, that beauty exists even outside the halls of wealth and social polish. Michael and I began to rebuild our relationship, not as mother and son in the shadows of judgment, but as equals in love, understanding, and respect. He called more often, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to share a memory or a laugh. And each time, I felt the old warmth return, though tempered now by wisdom and awareness. Clara reached out as well, hesitantly at first. Her apologies were quiet, not grand but sincere. I accepted them, not because I needed them to feel whole, but because I understood the power of acknowledgement and the value of closure. Their attempts to control, belittle, or diminish me had failed, and I had survived, stronger, steadier, and infinitely more self-aware. I spent more time tending my garden, nurturing flowers that reminded me of growth, patience, and resilience. The roses, once sparse and shy, now bloomed with quiet elegance, much like the strength I had cultivated within myself. Each petal, delicate yet enduring, seemed to whisper a simple truth: beauty and worth are intrinsic, not bestowed by others, not dependent on approval or recognition. I also returned to old passions: reading, writing, and even volunteering in the community. These activities, small as they might seem, became acts of reclamation. They reminded me that my life had value outside the confines of social judgment or familial expectation. I was whole, not because anyone had validated me, but because I had chosen to recognize my own worth. The experience had taught me lessons I wished I could have imparted to my younger self. I learned that true love does not diminish or demand invisibility. It does not thrive on manipulation or subtle cruelty. True love is steady, patient, and respectful. The kind I had always given Michael and now, finally, allowed myself to receive in return. I also learned the power of courage. the courage to speak, to stand, and to claim oneself fully, even when faced with discomfort, opposition, or silence. I had discovered that the most profound strength often comes not from confrontation with others, but from the quiet, unwavering reclamation of one's dignity and self-worth. There were still moments of reflection, of sadness, and even of grief. I thought often of the months when I felt small, invisible, and dismissed. I allowed myself to feel those emotions fully, not to be trapped by them, but to understand them, to integrate them, and to grow stronger from them. Every tear shed, every sleepless night endured, became a thread in the tapestry of resilience that I had woven. I realized that life, in its quietest and simplest moments, offers lessons not always gentle, but always necessary. We are tested, pushed, and sometimes broken, but in those very trials, we discover our capacity for endurance, love, and self-recognition. Sitting in my garden one evening, I looked up at the stars scattered across the dark sky. I thought about the journey I had walked. From subtle humiliation to profound awakening, from despair to self-respect. I breathed in the night air, scented with jasmine and earth, and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I had survived, and in surviving, I had flourished. I had reclaimed my dignity, reestablished my place in my son's life, and, most importantly, I had reclaimed myself. I understood now that no external circumstance could define my worth, that no manipulation or subtle cruelty could diminish the love I had for myself, or the value of the life I had built. I learned that true freedom comes not from victory over others, but from victory over fear, doubt, and self-neglect. It comes from the courage to stand tall in the face of humiliation, to speak truth in the face of denial, and to honor oneself above all else. I had been tested, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more serene. As I looked at the roses, the soft flicker of candlelight through the window, and the stars above, I realized that life, in all its complexity and struggle, is still beautiful. Pain teaches, hardship strengthens, and love, real love, never diminishes those who give it sincerely. And so, my story ends not with vengeance, nor with bitterness, but with quiet triumph and reflection. I have learned that the most important battles are fought within, and the most significant victories are those of the heart. True love cannot be bought, and freedom is worth any price. Respect cannot be demanded, it must be acknowledged, and sometimes, it must be claimed through courage and steadfastness. And dignity, once regained, becomes a light that no shadow can extinguish. And you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent, shrinking under the weight of humiliation? Or would you have found the courage to stand, to speak, and to reclaim yourself? I'd love to hear your opinion in the comments. Remember, the strength to reclaim your life is already inside you. You just need to recognize it, trust it, and let it guide you to the peace, dignity,